I always thought that if the day came when I'd get fired, I'd at least see it coming. A hallway rumor, a strange look from HR, or, if I was lucky, a polite, "We're restructuring" warning. But no, it hit me like an electric bill, dry, abrupt, and arriving right on schedule at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. But let me rewind to the day before. New York was cold in that clean, steady way that makes hot coffee look like it's breathing. I walked into the Sterling Capital Partners building, the place where I'd spent 7 years of my life, and if I'm honest, most of my professional soul. I remember choosing a navy blazer and pinning the small silver brooch my mother gave me when I first got the job. "To remind you that you're not invisible," she said. It sounded dramatic at the time, but it worked. The boardroom sat on the 42nd floor, overlooking Central Park. Beautiful in that arrogant way, as if the building itself was saying, "We watch the world from above." Inside, Richard Hale, my boss, the executive vice president, was already seated. Sunlight glinted off his Rolex, sharp enough to sting. "I reviewed your application," he began, flipping through the packet like he was choosing dessert at a French restaurant. "And?" I asked, keeping my hand still on my lap, though my right knee had already started tapping, the reflex that always shows up right before something goes wrong. Richard looked up, took off his glasses, and gave that smile, the kind that says you won't like this answer, but I'm still the good guy here. "A promotion, Sophia? I don't think you're ready. Maybe in a few more years." The words hit the table like a cold cup of water dumped on paperwork, messy, soaking, and impossible to ignore. I swallowed a dry laugh. "Not ready?" I repeated. "After the $5 billion Westland Tech deal? The one I led, stabilized, and saved when their board almost pulled out?" He shrugged. "You did great, Sophia. But sometimes great isn't enough. At the leadership level, we need presence, vision, a little politics." Politics. The favorite word of people who never understand the process but always end up with microphones. I didn't argue, didn't cry. I gave a slight nod. What people on Wall Street call the corporate bow. A nod not of submission, but of closure. "Thank you for your honesty," I said, standing up. "I believe the Ellison proposal needs your attention," Richard added, eyes already on his laptop. His coffee cup made a tiny click as it hit the table again, the sound of pure indifference. I walked out without a word, past the whiteboard room where I once mapped the entire Westland rescue plan. Now it sat empty, silent, as if history itself had been erased. That night, I told my daughter I wouldn't be traveling next week after all. She smiled, I smiled back. But inside, everything was collapsing. And then, the next morning, exactly 8 o'clock, the email arrived. Subject: termination of employment. Restructuring. Notification sender. Human Resources Body. Dear Ms. Grant, we regret to inform you. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. But no, they really had fired me. Right after denying me a promotion. I sat in the kitchen, coffee cold in my hand, while my lazy cat stared like even she was offended. Restructuring. A word used like a rug to cover something ugly and pretend it's clean. By afternoon, I walked out of Sterling's headquarters for the last time. Cardboard box in hand, a few notebooks, my favorite fountain pen, and the silver brooch my mother gave me. I stopped at the lobby glass wall and saw my reflection. Navy blazer, hair slightly wind-tossed, eyes no longer soft. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. Just one thought echoed in my head, clear and sharp as a taxi horn on Fifth Avenue. You'll soon learn that cutting the pillar doesn't make the house stronger. It only makes it fall faster. I stood there for a long moment, watching my reflection and the building behind it. The woman who once believed loyalty and competence were enough. Turns out they weren't. And if you've ever stood where I stood, overlooked, underestimated, told to stay behind the spotlight, then welcome to this story. It's not just mine, It's ours. If you're listening while driving, making coffee, or settling into the couch after a long day, I'd love to know where you are. Drop a comment below, just a few words, so I know you're here and that you understand. And if you love stories of elegant revenge, the kind that doesn't lower itself but still makes them step back, then you'll want to hear what comes next. Don't forget to follow, because this story has only just begun. I got home earlier than usual that night, but it felt later than ever. The kitchen clock was still ticking steadily, the only thing in my life that hadn't changed. My mother sat in the armchair by the window, a thin wool shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She'd started her first round of chemotherapy the week before. The last time I took her to the hospital, I'd finished the Ellison deal presentation in the car, laptop on my knees, cold coffee in hand. She didn't say a word, just placed her hand over mine and squeezed. The kind of squeeze that silently asked, "Are you sure you're still really living?" That night, I made her favorite vegetable soup. No special reason. I just needed to feel like I was doing something kind for someone who wanted nothing from me except my presence. When my 10-year-old daughter Emma came running down the stairs, backpack swinging, hair messy, cookie crumbs on her lips, I knew I had to keep my face calm. "Did you finish your math homework?" I asked. "All done," she said, then hesitated. "You're home early. No meetings tonight?" I smiled, careful not to let my eyes drop. "No, I'll be home a little more from now on." She didn't ask why, just said, "Good," and ran off to turn on the TV. Kids notice more than we think, but they also know when to leave things alone. Later that night, after both my mom and Emma had fallen asleep, I sat at my desk under the dim yellow light of an old lamp. The screen in front of me showed a simple line of code. Nothing complicated for someone who built it from scratch. SG Framework. User Access Protocol. I created it, a real-time investment risk and market forecasting system that had saved Sterling from at least 3 crises in the past 3 years. Richard called it an internal tool. I called it the reason he still had a job. I knew the company would try to keep access, pretend they understood how it worked. They didn't. No one did, except me. I was never allowed to train a team or transfer the technology. They told me, just make it work. Don't over-explain. Well, there's no one left to just make it work now. I stared at the blinking cursor, waiting for me to decide. Part of me wanted to leave it, call it professional courtesy. But a bigger, quieter part whispered, they chose to disregard you. No one gets to demand kindness from the person they just discarded like a jammed paperclip. I typed, slowly, carefully. Revoke access. Confirm. Are you sure? I typed. Yes, my hands trembling slightly. Not from regret, but from realizing this was the first time in 7 years I'd made a major decision without asking anyone's permission. The screen turned white. A small message appeared. Access successfully revoked. I exhaled. Not relieved, not hurt, just empty. I looked around my small home office, the same room where I'd spent countless nights making slides until 2 in the morning, drinking tea and fixing the small mistakes Richard never admitted. Once, I even rewrote an entire client contract after he misspelled the investment fund's name 3 times. I never complained. I thought dedication would eventually be recognized. Now I know, sometimes, the price of dedication is being forgotten. I opened the drawer and pulled out a photo. Emma, when she was 6, baking cookies for Thanksgiving. I remembered that day. I got a call from the office while kneading dough. Richard, just needed a quick number, something he should have had if he'd read my daily reports. I left Emma standing by the oven, flour on her sleeves, watching me grab the phone out of reflex. I touched the edge of the photo. Not anymore, I whispered. Not ever again. That night, I set my alarm early. Not because I had anywhere to be. I just wanted to wake up and start thinking about something other than the game I'd just been cut out of. The game I'd built myself. Because if they thought I'd sit quietly in the dark, they clearly forgot one thing. I'm the one who built the stage. And a stage without its director doesn't stay standing for long. 3 weeks after I left Sterling, the world didn't explode. No fiery chaos, No breaking news about plummeting stocks, just small things, at first. Internal emails started landing in the wrong inboxes. Data tables began showing natural calculation errors. Clients asked questions no one on the team could answer. A partnership with Barkley and Moss got delayed because the financial presentation didn't match their required format, the one I'd customized and used for the past 4 years. The IT department blamed a system update. They even emailed me, asking if I remembered anyone ever tampering with the core data platform. I read the message from an unnamed Gmail address, sighed, and deleted it. I wasn't there anymore. They'd have to manage on their own. As for Richard Hale, he still walked into the office every morning at 8:30 sharp, latte in hand, suit pressed to perfection. Some days, he even laughed in the hallway while reading the finance news. Ellison hasn't signed with a competitor yet, one employee told me later. He said if we just hold on a few more weeks, we can still win them back. A few more weeks. In those weeks, the market analysis system started showing strange yield gaps. One miscalculated forecast pushed the investment team to pour $60 million into a dying model. When the error report reached him, Richard marked it in red and wrote, "This is a data entry issue, not a system fault." He said that, the same man who'd once declared the system was self-learning, self-correcting, and not dependent on any individual. I laughed when I read the leaked internal memo, a laugh with no sweetness in it. And then came Titan Group, one of Sterling's 3 biggest clients, holding over $400 million in active portfolios I had personally designed. The first week after I left, they said nothing. The second week, they sent an email about flexible interest adjustments. By the third, they scheduled a meeting, not with Richard, but with legal. The rumor spread faster than the market could react. An administrative assistant, the same one who used to quietly help me print reports at midnight, texted me. Titan's considering pulling out. They're asking for 18 months of transaction history, and no one can explain the Q2 investment logic. Of course, they couldn't explain it, because I never wrote a summary. I built it as a living map, updated weekly through cash flow metrics and live market sensors. Something you can't copy, something you can't hand over. And that's when Claire Monroe, the HR director, the one who used to look at me like I was mid-level support staff, started to notice. She stayed quiet, watching from the hallway during meetings, listening to every incomplete answer, every uneasy glance whenever someone mentioned SG framework. One morning, just after Richard wrapped up a call, Claire stepped into his office with a folder in hand. "I think we should review the client re-engagement process," she said, "based on Sophia's analytics framework." Richard didn't look up. "We're not using her old system anymore." "Because no one understands how?" Claire asked. Not sharp, but not apologetic either. Richard looked up then, eyes colder than usual. "Stop talking about her," he said, each word clipped. "She's gone. Everyone is replaceable." Claire didn't respond, just gave a slow, polite nod, the kind I knew well. Not out of respect, but because there was nothing left to say. Meanwhile, across town, I was washing dishes. Emma had finished her homework. My mother was dozing off on the couch. The TV played a muted finance segment, the anchor's voice barely above a whisper. Sterling Capital Partners dropped 3% in the past 24 hours. Cause unknown, but several investors report they're reconsidering their portfolios. I dried my hands on a kitchen towel, picked up my phone, and opened my personal email. A new message from Liam Chen. Subject line, "Ready?" I didn't reply. Not yet. Sterling needed to wobble a little longer. Not collapse, not yet. Just enough to feel what it's like when a foundation disappears and no one knows when it started. I didn't reply to Liam's email right away. I let it sit there, buried between webinar invitations and a fall sweater sale from a brand I'd never bought anything from. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew that once I did, everything would change. We'd met 2 years earlier, during a chaotic joint venture meeting, back when Liam was still a temporary strategy advisor for Sterling. In a boardroom packed with men in gray suits and navy ties, he was the only one who didn't take notes, yet somehow remembered the 3 exact figures I mentioned in my presentation. During the coffee break, he stood beside me at the counter, poured himself some water, and said casually, Great analysis. But I'm guessing your boss will change the first 3 lines and call it his own, right? I nearly spilled my tea. And now, 2 years later, he'd sent me an email with a single word in the subject line. Ready. No question mark. Just that. I called him that afternoon, while Emma was sketching and my mother was dozing on the couch. You know, emails like that usually get flagged as spam, I said instead of hello. Liam laughed. I heard paper rustling. He was probably still at the office. Yeah, but if you're who I think you are, you'd open it. And if I'm not? Then I'll pretend I sent it to the wrong person. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in 3 weeks. We met the next day at a vintage cafe in Soho, the kind with a soft bell that rings every time the door opens. Liam showed up in a white shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled up. The kind of man who could walk into a billion-dollar meeting at 9 a.m. and grab drinks with friends at 6 without changing a thing. He slid a thin folder across the table, his tone direct. I want you to lead a new project for Aurelia. Your design, your build. No reporting chain, unless you want one. I lifted my cup, watching him through the steam. Why me? Because I know at Sterling, you were the only one who knew what was really going on. I watched Richard reuse your slides and throw in words he didn't understand. I saw you fixing contracts while everyone else was cutting cake. I nodded. No denial, no need for one. He went on. We're building a new investment platform. Cleaner, smarter, more ethical. Not the fake kind of green. A system that can assess not just financial risk but social impact. And I want the person who kept a company from collapsing, without anyone realizing it, to design it. I flipped through the pages. Diagrams, mock-ups, rough sketches. This would take at least 6 months and a 5-person team. You'll have a year, and you'll choose your own people. I set the folder down. And if I want Richard to know I built it, Liam raised an eyebrow, then I'll put your name on the LED ticker around Sterling's office if I have to. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, a soul taxi passed, dragging along the hum of a city that never waits. I'm not after revenge, I said. I just want to be seen. Liam nodded. I know, and you will be. But for them to see you clearly, you have to stand where they're forced to look up. That line stayed with me the entire ride home. That night, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. New Structure Alpha. The first subfolder I named Vision. I didn't write anything inside yet, not because I lacked ideas, but because this time I wanted everything to start the right way, with intent, with purpose, without anyone cutting off the first 3 lines and calling them theirs. The next morning I texted Liam, ready. He replied with a single dot. I smiled. Maybe that's the language of people who've been underestimated. No fancy words, just action. And that's how I began rewriting the way a company runs. Only this time, I wouldn't stand quietly behind the curtain. This time, I'd be the voice they couldn't ignore. The news broke on a Monday morning, the kind of timing only seasoned manipulators know how to choose. I was standing in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to whistle, when my mother, who never cared about finance unless it involved the price of milk, called out from the living room. Sophia, you're on TV. I thought she was mistaken. But no, my name was right there, scrolling across the bottom of a national finance broadcast. Former Sterling Capital employee accused of stealing internal data and falsifying billion-dollar deal reports. The kettle screamed. Coffee spilled across the counter. I didn't wipe it. I just stood there, watching my name being pulled into the week's scandal cycle like seasoning thrown into a pot. Beside it, an old photo. Me standing next to Richard at an event, holding a microphone, smiling politely. I looked exactly like what they wanted me to be, a perfect assistant. The media is a beast, and Richard knew exactly how to feed it. Within hours, dozens of outlets copied and pasted each other's headlines. The woman behind Sterling's market model. Genius or thief? Did Sophia Grant steal intellectual property? Westland Tech. The truth behind the billion-dollar deal and the shadow of a forgotten name. No real evidence, just anonymous insiders and sources close to Sterling. The kind of language built to burn reputations without accountability. Liam called that afternoon. You holding up? I once got denied a promotion in less than 10 words, I said. eyes still on a new article titled, Why Sophia Grant Might Be the One Who Destroyed Sterling from the Inside. Think we should hit back? He asked. I paused. Not yet. Let's see how far they want to push it. 48 hours later, when a minor finance blog tried to link me to an old compliance issue from 7 years ago, back when I was a broke intern at a startup that doesn't even exist anymore, I knew it was time. I opened my old folder called Old Drafts, scrolled down to Risk Warning Westland, and found a chain of emails titled, Potential Instability in Westland's Q2 Debt Position, Urgent. I'd sent it 3 times to Richard, twice marked Seen, once answered with a single word, handled. I'd taken screenshots, not because I knew I'd need them someday, but because when you work for someone who steals credit and dodges blame, you learn to document everything like a quiet witness. That night, I sat in front of my webcam. No makeup, no filters, no polished background, no rehearsed defense. I simply said, Good evening, my name is Sophia Grant, and I have 3 emails, 6 attachments, and 1 risk forecast no one ever opened. If you're wondering why the Westland deal collapsed from the inside, the answer has been sitting in Sterling's inbox since March. Then I opened each file. No drama, no tears, just facts, in PDF form, time-stamped and traceable. I ended with one simple line. No one wants their former company to fail, but when failure is built on silence after a warning, that failure no longer belongs to the one who spoke up. The video lasted exactly 2 minutes and 43 seconds. I posted it on my LinkedIn and my brand new YouTube channel. No catchy caption, no hashtags, just truth, left to stand on its own. By the next morning, it had 1.3 million views. 3 major financial papers reached out for interviews. 2 TV networks requested broadcasting rights. A veteran journalist wrote, While Sterling scrambles to define what data theft means, Sophia Grant simply opened old emails and asked the real question, who stopped reading the data? Sterling's stock dropped 18% in 2 days. Clients started booking meetings. Investors asked, was she the only one who left? And Claire, the HR director, was seen leaving Richard's office, face tense, hands gripping a thick folder. That evening, I got a message from a former colleague. Finally, someone said it out loud. Across town in the 42nd floor boardroom, Richard Hale slammed a report onto the table. The coffee mug jumped, like it was even tired. He shouted, She wants a war? Fine. Let's show her who's really in charge here. But this time, no one laughed along. One person quietly took notes, another stared out the window, and for the first time in years, the one who walked away was the one being heard. It took Richard only 2 days to reach out. I knew he would. Men like him never lose quietly. They need a stage, a few chairs to knock over, and an audience to pretend they're still in control before they finally back down. The call came at 9:47 that night, an unknown number. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Can we meet? No greeting. No, it's Richard. Just that familiar voice. Only now, half as steady as it used to be. Now? I asked. I know a place, in Manhattan. Quiet. Neutral. He used the word neutral if this was a diplomatic meeting between 2 countries armed with nukes. I thought for a moment, then said, Send the address. The bar was tucked inside an old hotel. Low wooden ceilings, warm amber lights, the kind of place where they pour whiskey from 1972 and call it nostalgia. I walked in and found him in the corner, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled halfway up, like he was trying to look casual but forgot how. A glass of bourbon sat half-finished in front of him, untouched since the first sip. You still show up on time, he said as I pulled out the chair. I worked for you for nearly a decade. Old habits die hard. I ordered sparkling water. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. We sat in silence for a few seconds. I didn't rush. Silence always makes control freaks nervous. I didn't ask you here to apologize, he started, placing both hands flat on the table like he was about to sign a deal. Didn't expect you to, I replied, taking my first sip. We both know you're the only one who really understands how the current platform runs. The rest of them, they're guessing, playing around with a system they couldn't have written a single line of code for. He paused, a trap, carefully laid out, waiting for me to step in. I said anyone could replace you. I was wrong. For the first time, Richard Hale admitted he was wrong. But, he continued, you also know what you're doing is hurting people. Not just me, innocent ones, employees, shareholders. I don't think you're that kind of person. I set my glass down. You call them innocent? The ones who looked away for years? The ones who cheered for a system built on one person's work, but handed the rewards to whoever stood closest to the spotlight? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. You could help me fix this. Start over. I'll step aside. Put your name on the project. You can be the real hero, but we need to put the fire out before it burns everything down. I leaned back. And you thought meeting me in a hotel bar at midnight was the best way to convince me? No, just the safest way. His tone stayed even, too even. I glanced at his jacket pocket, a faint red light blinking softly, almost invisible but unmistakable, a mini recorder. You've always thought you could control everyone, Richard, I said quietly, like telling an old story. Through promises, forgiveness, and recordings. He blinked. But you forgot the most important thing. I smiled. I built the board you're trying to play on. I stood, grabbed my bag, and stopped behind him. Good luck with that recording. I think you'll need it more than you realize. I left before his bourbon was touched again. The next morning, an audio clip surfaced on a second-tier finance blog. Caption: Sophia Grant admits her role in the Sterling crisis? Not even 2 hours later, I uploaded the full version, from my camera, filmed from the opposite table. I opened with one line. Actually, I brought a recorder too. I didn't use it to trap anyone. I used it to remind myself that truth has more than one side, and I wanted to tell mine. The video spread twice as fast as his leak, and this time, no one asked what data I still had. They only asked one question. How many people had Richard tried to trap before Sophia? When the full, unedited recording went public, that wasn't Sterling's biggest shock. The real blow landed Wednesday morning around 10 o'clock. A strange data error rippled through the company's international trading system. I was at home, sunlight slipping through the blinds, soft classical music playing on the radio, when my phone buzzed. It was Liam. Sterling just lost an $800 million international contract, he said. They're spiraling. I didn't answer, just lowered my head. This wasn't a small glitch. It was a crack in the windshield, the kind that spreads until the whole thing shatters. News spread fast. Bloomberg. Sterling loses $800 international deal. Insider says data mismatch. The Wall Street Journal. Sterling stock plunges 12% amid data scandal. Major investors sent urgent emails to the board. We will withdraw 40% of reserve capital unless a public audit is released. The trading floor was chaos. On the New York Stock Exchange, Sterling's stock had dropped 18% in 2 days. Trading volume spiked. Investors panicked. Partner funds sounded alarms. Inside the boardroom, the air was heavy. Claire Monroe, silent for years, arrived late, carrying a thick folder. Her eyes were red. When she walked in, every head turned. Not out of respect, out of curiosity. She set the folder on the table before anyone could speak. I've sent the full internal record, she said. Emails, meeting notes, system access logs, everything, to the board's secure server. The room froze. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Claire cut him off. That includes the draft Sophia wrote warning about Westland Tech's risk exposure. It includes your one-word replies, demons, the scene marks on each email, and it includes the access history to SG Framework from the past month. He couldn't deny it. He turned toward the chairman. Sir, Ms. Monroe acted without authorization, but The chairman tapped his pen against the table, voice cold. That's enough, Richard. You're suspended immediately, pending internal investigation. A senior executive rose to her feet, voice trembling. I'll testify. I heard him say Sophia was irreplaceable. I saw him delete files after she left the room. Richard stared at her, eyes wide, but stayed silent. External shareholders began emailing. Who's managing risk now? If the person who built the system was the one fired. By noon, headlines rolled in. Sterling's downfall. The woman they fired is now the only one who can save it. Former employees, the ones quietly replaced, started posting their own stories. I was pushed out too. I was part of the invisible system. Sterling was now a sinking ship, water pouring in faster than anyone could bail it out. International clients froze their transactions. Cash flow controls tightened. The legal department scrambled to draft emergency terms. Partners issued warnings. Another loss, and they'd walk. By afternoon, Richard was officially suspended, ordered to hand over his system keys, company email, and all internal access rights. For the first time in years, he left the executive suite through the back door. I watched the news on my phone. Liam texted, "They need us." I replied, "And now they do." The board called for an emergency session. Sterling formed a crisis committee and hired outside legal counsel. Through it all, Claire stepped into the light, no longer Richard's silent ally, but the one presenting an honest report, the one defending transparency. A board member said aloud, "We used to see SG framework as just a support tool. Turns out it's the foundation, and whoever built it determines our future." That day, Sterling issued a list of immediate actions: suspension of 3 financial products, a 30-day audit of all internal data systems, and full cooperation with fintech regulators. The stock continued to fall, but for the first time, people started asking a different question. Can Sterling recover? And they began to realize something. The person they'd fired, the one they thought was gone, was the only one holding the key to unlock the door again. I stood in my small workspace, just my personal laptop on the desk, no company network, no noise, looking out over Manhattan as the daylight faded. I knew what came next wasn't about answering the scandal. It was about rebuilding a company from the wreckage, and I started rewriting the script Sterling would have to perform, this time on my terms. I arrived at Sterling's lobby that morning before sunrise. Headlights flickered across the glass doors, and in the chill of dawn, I could feel every breath of the decision waiting ahead. I held a thin folder, not mine anymore, but filled with the names and notes of those who'd been left behind in the system. When the elevator opened on the 39th floor, it felt like the hatch of an old vault unlocking. The boardroom waited on the other side, a room I'd walked through many times as an advisor, but today I was stepping in with a different kind of power. The room was quieter than I expected. As the door opened, every gaze turned toward me. From Claire Monroe to the chairman, the board members, and finally, Richard Hale. He sat at the center of the table, suit pressed, eyes cold as ice. The chairman stood, voice steady and worn. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Grant. We're in crisis. We need your transparency and your capability to stabilize this company." I stepped forward, posture straight, voice even. "I've reviewed the financial reports, the system data, and the client feedback. I know where Sterling broke, and I know how long people have refused to see it." Richard leaned forward, gripping his pen. "Sophia, please, give me a chance to make this right. I'll personally oversee the rebuild. I don't want to lose this company. I was wrong." A ripple moved through the room, but I stayed silent. Then I looked him straight in the eye, voice sharp as a laser. "I'll come back to lead Sterling, but on one condition. You resign, here, now, in front of everyone." The room froze. Richard didn't move, every eye fixed on him, the man who once ruled this table like a throne. A quiet board member finally spoke. "Ms. Grant, can you assume responsibility immediately?" "I'll take on interim management until a new leadership board is elected," I said. "I accept responsibility to shareholders, to clients, and to the system. I didn't come back to stand behind anyone. I came to rebuild." Claire rose beside me, her voice calm. "I support this condition. I'll work with her to ensure a fair transition." Richard's hand trembled as he picked up the pen. His face had gone pale. He signed the resignation, lifted his hand from the paper, and stood. Without a word, he walked toward the door. As he passed, his eyes met mine, a mix of resentment, respect, and something like disbelief. Before he disappeared behind the closing door, the room was silent. The chairman exhaled, then said, "Per your proposal, and following Mr. Hale's resignation, the board appoints you as acting CEO, effective immediately. A formal vote will take place in 90 days." I nodded, expression steady. When I left the boardroom, the hallway felt endless. Through the tall glass wall, New York stretched below, dawn spilling between towers. Car horns echoing like the pulse of the city. Claire walked beside me. "You did the right thing," she said softly. I met her eyes. Gratitude without words. She understood. Some moments don't need speech. As I stepped through the glass doors on the ground floor, a breeze swept past. My reflection appeared in the window. Navy blazer, hair tousled by the wind, eyes calm, not soft, not hard, just clear. I thought of the morning I was fired, standing in the same place, clutching a cardboard box, vision blurred by exhaustion and disbelief. Now I was back, not to ask, not to restore, but to build something entirely new. Upstairs, the boardroom door closed behind Richard. His footsteps faded down the hall. Within minutes, staff began gathering documents, stamping pages, shuffling papers. No raised voices, no chaos, just a quiet order. My phone buzzed. A message from Liam. "Congratulations. Welcome home." I didn't reply. I looked at the screen, slipped the phone into my pocket. In my mind, I thought, the real battle starts now. I didn't come back to reclaim what I lost. I came back to make sure no one ever looks at me the same way again. A year had passed since I walked back into Sterling, not as someone returning from failure, but as someone who had carried the wreckage home, rebuilt each piece, and laid the first stones of a foundation I still believed in. I sat in the CEO's chair, high above the city, eyes fixed on New York, stretching endlessly beyond the glass. The balcony's reflection caught the taxis, the towers, the streets below. Everything waiting, still, for a new beginning. Sterling was no longer the company it used to be. It had to learn transparency, accountability, and equity, words people once used only to polish press releases. In my first all-hands meeting, I opened with numbers, operating costs, financial scores, risk metrics, upcoming projects, all displayed openly in front of everyone. No hidden dashboards, no internal access only. Every figure was explained step by step. When someone asked about the failed deal, I said, "That's a lesson, not a secret." There were more women in leadership now, something I had always wanted. When talent was equal, women got the first look. I remembered Emma once told me, "I want to be a director, but I'm scared people will think I'm just an assistant." I hugged her and said, "You're not helping anyone's vision. You're building your own." I created the Sterling Future Leaders Fund, a program for recruiting and developing talent whose names no one had noticed. Mentorships, workshops, startup grants. I wanted those who had been forgotten to see their own names on the slides, not buried behind them. Claire Monroe, once Richard's loyal ally, now served as Sterling's conscience. She built an internal reporting channel that allowed even junior employees to speak up safely. She became the balance between empathy and authority. And Liam Chen, my partner in rebuilding, led the technical core behind Sterling AI, our new analytics platform. Real-time forecasting, ESG evaluations, adaptive learning, everything ran on data and transparency. We worked like harmony lines in the same score. He built the engine, I drew the map, and Sterling was the stage. One morning, I walked down the 42nd floor, the same corridor where I'd once been dismissed. It had been renovated but kept its old bones, the strip lighting across the ceiling, the wide glass overlooking Manhattan. I stepped into the old boardroom, the long table, leather chairs, and the whiteboard where I once mapped the Westland rescue. On the table sat a small box. Inside was a clock, its hands frozen at 8:00 a.m. One of my team members touched the box and said softly, "We kept it as a symbol." I lifted the clock, wound it, and the second hand began to move again. I looked around the room, quiet except for the light and the tick of time. Then I said, "Let's start again from the very place everything ended." The ticking sounded like the opening line of a new chapter. Beyond the boardroom, glass, the morning sun stretched across my face, not the light of revenge, but of recognition. I smiled, not because I'd won, not because justice had finally been served, but because, at last, I was seen. And you. Which moment in this story stopped you, made you feel like you'd been there too? Tell me in the comments below. I read every single one, and I know someone out there needs to hear what you just felt. If you believe in stories where justice unfolds with grace, precision, and humanity, don't forget to follow and turn on notifications, because the journey of those once underestimated, silenced, or cast aside isn't over yet, and I'll be here to tell it. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.